Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly fascinating and honestly, deeply moving. We're going to explore the often misunderstood romantic behaviors of folks with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. We're taking real, clinical, psychiatric insights and decoding them, and to make it all come alive, we'll be looking through the lens of an absolute cinematic masterpiece. So if you've ever felt like love and human connection can sometimes look like this giant, unsolvable puzzle, well, you are definitely in the right place. Let's get into it.
Now, think about this for a second. Why is it hardest to approach the people we actually like the most? It's a really painful paradox so many of us face, right? But for some, it is profoundly magnified. Imagine having these incredibly intense romantic feelings, a real, genuine desire to connect, but the second it comes to acting on them directly, you just completely freeze up. It's like the closer you want to be, the more impossible it feels to literally just cross the room and close that gap. So instead of walking up to someone, you might find yourself just endlessly rehearsing conversations in your head, or maybe preferring to help them in secret rather than actually speaking face to face.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the ASD romance paradox. Then, we'll break down 5 patterns of affection. Third, we'll dive into our case study on Amélie. And finally, we'll wrap up with a prescription for love.
All right, jumping right into Section 1, the ASD romance paradox, misunderstood intentions indirectly making that person happy. To really wrap our heads around this, we need to ground ourselves in the psychiatric insights. Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, is a developmental condition. It's characterized by unique sensory processing, specific routines, and, absolutely crucial for our topic today, distinct approaches to interpersonal relationships. You see, a person with ASD might experience the world and their emotions with an intensity that can just be totally overwhelming. Their feelings of affection are often incredibly strong, but the traditional direct methods of expressing those feelings, well, they just don't compute in quite the same way.
Moving right along to Section 2, patterns of affection. We're looking at 5 specific behaviors.
So when we map out these 5 patterns, the indirect approach, imaginary progression, sensory pacing, distant observation, and deep devotion, what's really amazing is you start to realize they aren't just random awkward quirks. Not at all. They actually form a logical, escalating journey. It's a highly structured way of navigating incredibly intense emotions when the standard social playbook just doesn't really work for you. Let's break these down one by one, shall we?
Pattern 1 is the indirect approach. Now, the societal misconception here is pretty harsh. People see this behavior and they immediately label it as cowardly or passive or just unnecessarily roundabout. But the reality of ASD, it's completely different. It is absolutely not a lack of feeling that stops them from just walking up and saying hello. Actually, it's an overwhelming intensity of feeling. Because they might not know how to behave directly without feeling completely flooded, they express their love by secretly preparing things or offering unnoticed help. For them, secretly making someone's life easier, that is literally their utmost expression of love.
Then we have pattern 2, imaginary progression. Society loves to dismiss this as just living in a fantasy world or having a bad habit of daydreaming. But the reality? It's a gentle defense mechanism. A person might meticulously rehearse perfect dates, map out entire dialogues, and imagine exactly how the other person will respond. And they do this because, let's face it, the unpredictability of a real-life interaction can be terrifying. The imagination becomes this safe space to process their intense affection without the massive risk of real-world uncertainty.
Okay, moving to pattern 3, sensory pacing. We often see individuals with ASD relying on fixed procedures or finding joy in specific sensory experiences, which society unfortunately tends to label as odd routines. But you know what? These routines are actually vital. They provide sensory pacing for emotional stability. By sticking to their own unique methods and sensory rituals, they're able to maintain their peace of mind. It basically allows them to richly experience the world and their relationships at a pace they can safely and comfortably process.
Now, pattern 4 is distant observation. Have you ever noticed someone who seems to just watch their crush from afar, but they never actually make a move? The misconception is that they're aloof or distant, maybe even a bit cold. But the ASD reality is that this physical distance is paired with incredibly intense observation. They're studying their crush's expressions, their habits, their little preferences. They desperately want to close the gap, but they just don't know how. So they observe from a distance, driven by a profound, totally genuine desire to deeply understand the person they care about.
And finally, pattern 5, deep devotion. While someone with ASD might struggle with broad, casual socializing, like mingling at a huge party, their capacity for trust and love is extraordinary once it's locked in. Society might call them awkward or inflexible in everyday social settings,
But take that to a romantic context, and it translates into a narrow, deep, and unwavering devotion. Their feelings don't just toss and turn with the wind. Once they trust someone, their affection is incredibly reliable and beautifully singular.
Which brings us to Section 3, Case Study, Amélie, a cinematic masterclass.
Now, let's look at the protagonist, Amélie. She's a cafe worker in Paris, and the way she lives her life, and particularly the way she falls in love, it perfectly mirrors the psychiatric traits we've just been talking about. She is completely driven by this deep desire to make the people around her happy, but she almost exclusively does it indirectly, going out of her way to hide her own involvement. Seriously, this 2001 film is a cinematic masterclass in the neurodivergent language of love. A really crucial point here is how the film visualizes her internal world. Think back to our third pattern, sensory pacing. Amélie has these highly specific, very tactile, sensory rituals. She absolutely loves the feeling of cracking the caramelized sugar of a crème brûlée with a spoon. She finds immense peace in skipping stones across the water. She just enjoys the deep sensory input of plunging her hands straight into big sacks of grain. Now, these aren't just quirky little character traits. They are essential rituals that provide her with real comfort, enrich her world, and give her the emotional stability she desperately needs.
And watch how brilliantly this aligns a romantic life with our clinical patterns. When Amélie falls deeply for a man named Nino, she doesn't just walk up and say, "Hi, no way!" Instead, she secretly delivers happiness, leaning entirely on that indirect approach. She finds his lost photo album, and rather than just tapping him on the shoulder and handing it back, she sets up these elaborate, mysterious riddles for him to solve. It's a picture-perfect example of distant observation, staying highly engaged, but physically away. And when they finally do arrange to meet, the reality becomes just way too overwhelming. She panics and runs away right before the encounter, retreating straight back into imaginary progression because at that moment, the fantasy is just infinitely safer than the real thing.
But, as we know, Amélie doesn't stay in hiding forever. The major turning point of the entire narrative actually relies on pattern 5, deep devotion. Her feelings for Nino, they aren't just some passing crush. They are narrow, deep, and totally unwavering. And it is precisely the immense weight of this singular devotion that finally forces her to find the incredible courage she needs to break right out of her protective shell. Her love literally becomes stronger than her need for the safety of her imagination, propelling her into the real world to face him directly.
And that leads us to Section 4, a prescription for love, lessons from Amélie. I want you to consider this profoundly reframed perspective. If you are struggling to approach someone you like, it might just mean your affection is truly genuine. If you see yourself or maybe someone you care about in these patterns, it is so vital to reframe the narrative. Hesitation, relying on imagination, or taking an indirect approach, these are not signs of cowardice. Often, they are absolute proof of the incredible strength, depth, and authenticity of those feelings. The emotion is simply so vast, it just requires careful, deliberate handling. So the takeaway here is deeply reassuring. Just like Amélie, your pace is perfect. If you need to observe from afar for a bit, or if you need to lean on your sensory routines to stay grounded while your feelings develop, that is completely okay. One step at a time is enough. That narrow, deep devotion, that incredible capacity for unwavering trust, it's a truly beautiful thing. And in its own time, it will eventually reach the right person.
I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. We are so conditioned by society to expect love to be loud, direct, and cinematic in this highly extroverted way. But knowing what we know now, how will you recognize and appreciate the quiet, deeply genuine expressions of love around you today? The next time you see someone being a little awkward or maybe taking an indirect route to show they care, I challenge you to see the intense, beautiful devotion right behind that action. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this helps you observe the world with just a little more empathy and understanding.